A bar complaint is filed against President Trump's FCC chairman, Brendan Carr. It was filed on Tuesday by the Campaign for Accountability in both D.C. and in Maryland to go after Carr's law license. The complaint blames Carr for Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, arguing he threatened broadcasters for airing political views he personally disagrees with, thereby potentially violating the rules of professional conduct for lawyers. But is that really the case? Joining me now to discuss is Rachel Bovard, the vice president of the Conservative Partnership Institute. Rachel, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So do you buy the accusation presented in this bar complaint that was filed against Brendan Carr?
I don't. And the reason I don't is because groups like this just exist to harass attorneys that are doing government work. Anyone who's looked at the situation understands that what Brendan Carr, all he was doing was speaking. First of all, he hasn't enforced the law against anyone. But even if he did, he is well within his rights to do so. The FCC governs licenses. They enforce the public interest standard, which requires broadcast companies to govern in the public interest. But that's not what he said. All he said was, hey, affiliates, in this case, Sinclair and Nexstar, who carry ABC and Disney, have the ability to say, no, we don't want to carry this programming. That's all he said. The affiliates' decisions to not carry the Jimmy Kimmel show are up to them. And so, again, this goes back to what is now, unfortunately, a longstanding tradition of groups on the left that exist to harass attorneys who are doing the president's service, right? They're serving in government, and as a result, they get harassed with bar complaints like this.
Would it be accurate to call some of this harassment lawfare? Because I remember after the 2020 election, after January 6th, we saw these bar complaints being filed against lawyers such as John Eastman, and so many others, right? And a lot of the complaints were just, this lawyer gave their client, President Trump, legal advice, and somehow that now meant that their law license should be revoked. So do you think that this is lawfare meant to chill, as you talk about in your X post as well, any legal mind from wanting to help conservatives and especially President Trump?
Lawfare is absolutely the appropriate term because, we hear about high profile cases like the one against Brendan Carr. You mentioned John Eastman. Jeff Clark is another example. People who, in the case of Eastman and Jeff Clark, were literally, as you mentioned, just giving legal advice to the president. And now Jeff Clark is likely to be disbarred by the DC bar for doing so. But a lot of these complaints are fired against what's called line attorneys, political attorneys working at the Department of Justice for President Trump. They aren't famous. They aren't in the news. They're not making policy. They are literally just representing the president in the Department of Justice. And when they walk into court, you could argue they are just, again, representing the president, implementing, his vision, his elected vision for the country. They aren't doing anything wrong, but these groups exist to file these complaints to harass, a lot of times these very young attorneys that don't have, tons of money to defend themselves. This is a case of the process being the punishment. Oftentimes, these groups, they know they're frivolous or they know they may not have merit, but that's not the point. The point is to intimidate and to harass attorneys that are doing their jobs.
Now, speak to us about the McDade Amendment. I believe that's the amendment here in question that Congress passed back in 1991. You talked about it once again on X. Can you explain for the audience what that is and how it ties into this conversation we're having here tonight?
Yeah, the McDade Amendment was, again, passed by Congress, as you mentioned. It's supposed to say, it does say that attorneys are still, even though they work in DC and they're working for the federal government, where they happen to be barred, because many of these attorneys come from all over the country. They wave into DC and they practice here, but they may be barred in states around the country. They are still beholden to their, ethics standards and, standards governing the bar in the state where they have their license. And so what happens is if you have an attorney from Florida that's working in the Department of Justice, this dark money group will go file a complaint at your bar licensing association in Florida against you, and then you are forced to defend it. The goal of the McDade Amendment at the time was it was in response to a lot of unethical activities that were happening in Congress. It was designed to try and enforce, some standards on these attorneys, but it's become abused. It's become a weapon of lawfare, and it doesn't really make sense either because these state bar associations are not necessarily set up to litigate questions of ethics at the federal level, which is what's being done here. So it's up to Congress. Congress can change this amendment. Congress can say, no, the state bars have no business litigating these questions of federal jurisdiction. The Department of Justice already has the Office of Professional Responsibility. They already have a pretty rigorous ethics standard. Perhaps we should just let that stand.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.